This math problem looks easy, and that's exactly why a lot of people are going to get it wrong. Now, one of these answers is correct. Take a second and look at them carefully. Pick one of them and then lock it in. Don't change your answer and go ahead and put that into the comment section. But you don't want to rush this because that's where a lot of people are going to make this very common mistake. All right, so we have 2 times parentheses, 1 plus 1 divided by 2 parentheses. And let's see how most people will approach this problem. Inside of the parentheses, we have 1 plus 1 divided by 2. And oftentimes, people will start with addition. They'll see this simple addition problem and start right here. So 1 plus 1, of course, is 2. So our problem would be 2 parentheses 1 plus 1 is 2 divided by 2. So this is a good first step for a lot of people. And now someone can say, well, 2 divided by 2 is 1. So now we have 2 times 1, right? Which of course is 2 divided by 2. That's 1. And 2 times 2 is 2. So B looks like a good answer. But someone else could look at this problem and say, well, I know when a number is outside of parentheses, this means multiplication, like 2 parentheses 3, this means multiplication. So someone could say, well, 2 times 2 is 4, and then this 2 times that 2 would be 4. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. So maybe the answer is 1. So both of these answers look completely reasonable. We're doing all the addition, multiplication, and division right. But there is a big problem with these answers, right? And it all comes down to the order in which we're doing the problem. Matter of fact, both of these answers are incorrect. And the reason why they're incorrect is that we got there by breaking a major rule of mathematics. And that rule is something called PEMDAS. So what is PEMDAS and how do we ignore it? Now, before I answer this question, let's take a look at this simple problem, 10 divided by 2 times 5. All right, so what is the answer to this question? Right? You ought to be able to do this right in your brain. Now, a lot of people are going to say 1, and some people are going to say 25. So if you got 1 as your answer, you went, well, 2 times 5 is 10, and then 10 divided by 10 is 1. So that looks pretty good. Now, you could also do this. You could go 10 divided by 2. This is 5, and then 5 times 5 is 25. All right, so the correct answer here is actually 25. So we have to do the division first before the multiplication. So why is this? Well, this is what PEMDAS is all about. So PEMDAS is an acronym. It's a checklist that goes from left to right, and it tells us the correct order to do a math problem. So every math problem is built from numbers and things called mathematical operators. And a mathematical operator is things like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, parentheses, powers, etc. All right, so PEMDAS, again, is an acronym. It's a checklist that tells us how to do a math problem. All right, so let me go ahead and explain PEMDAS. And once we understand this, we'll be able to see why our first 2 options, A and B, are wrong. And then, of course, we'll be able to understand how to do this problem right. Okay, so let me go ahead and erase all of this and quickly explain PEMDAS. All right, so as I indicated, PEMDAS is going to tell us the correct order of operations. And the mathematical topic that we are talking about here is actually called the order of operations. So PEMDAS is a checklist that goes from left to right. So P, we're going to start here, stands for parentheses. So if your math problem has any parentheses, but you can also have brackets or these type of squiggly brackets, these are called grouping symbols. So if you see any of these in your math problem, this is where you're going to start. All right, you're going to do all the math inside of these grouping symbols first before you do anything else. All right, so once again, not all math problems will have parentheses or grouping symbols, but if they do, that's where you need to start first. Okay, so the next thing here is called exponents. All right, this is what this E stands for. And really what we're talking about here is powers. So if I have 2 to the 3rd power, this little number up here is called the exponent, and it means take 2 and multiply it by itself 3 times. So 2 times 2 times 2, of course, is 8. All right, so if you don't have any exponents or powers, you're going to move on to the next thing. Now, a lot of people are going to think that, well, the next thing is M. Matter of fact, let me just tell you what M, D, A, and S stand for. M stands for multiplication, D stands for division, A stands for addition, and S stands for subtraction. Now, it seems logical that the next thing here is multiplication, but this is not exactly how PEMDAS works. All right, so the next thing actually is any multiplication and division, whatever we see first from left to right. And I can tell you, as a math teacher, someone who's been teaching for decades, this is one of the biggest math mistakes I see. All right, so you got to be really careful here with PEMDAS, especially with multiplication and division. So let's go back to our simple problem here. So we had 10 divided by 2 times 5. So here, thinking about this problem, we're not going to do multiplication first because we have both multiplication and division in our problem. So what do we see first from left to right? Well, we see the division. That's why we had to divide 10 divided by 2 before we did the multiplication. All right, so this is the critical importance of PEMDAS. Okay, so once you're done with all multiplication and division, you'll move on to addition and subtraction and do it the same way, whatever you see first from left to right. All right, now going back up to our options here, okay, the first couple ways we thought about this problem, or someone could have thought about this problem, you can see that this is clearly wrong because here we have parentheses, and it's fine to start inside of the parentheses, but you can see that someone did the addition right here, right? So they added before division. So this is one violation of PEMDAS right here. And then right here, if you had this 2 and you started to multiply in without doing the division first inside of the parentheses, well, this is another violation of PEMDAS as well. Okay, so now that we understand PEMDAS, we're going to see which answer is right. So is it C or D? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the solution right now. So now that we understand PEMDAS, this should be very easy to solve. Okay, so here is our problem and here is our checklist, and all we have to do is follow the PEMDAS checklist to get the right answer. Okay, so let's start with P here. Do we have any parentheses? Well, clearly we do. So that means we have to work inside of the parentheses and get this all done before we do anything else. All right, so now let's take a look at E. Do we have any exponents? So we took a look at P, and now we need to ask ourselves, do we have any exponents? Do we see any powers here? And the answer is no. Okay, so I don't see any powers, things like 2 squared or 3 to the 4th power, so we can move on to the next thing. All right, so what is the next thing? Now remember, it's not just M, it's M and D. Do we have any multiplication or division? Now remember, our focus is still inside of the parentheses. All right, so we're not considering the entire problem. We're just working on what's inside of the parentheses. It's basically its own little separate math problem. So we have addition here and we have division. Of course, we have to do all multiplication and division before any addition and subtraction. So what we need to do here first is 1 divided by 2. And this is actually a fraction. All right, so this problem is going to get very interesting. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we need to do. So 1 divided by 2 is what? Well, let's just kind of rewrite the problem. So we have 2 parentheses, 1 plus 1 divided by 2, and we can write this as the fraction 1/2. All right, so now we need to go back to our PEMDAS checklist. All right, so what's inside of the parentheses? Well, the only thing left to do is addition. All right, so we're going to go ahead and finish up with this addition right here. So 1 plus 1/2 is what? Well, that is 1 and 1/2, or the fraction 2 times 1 is 2 plus 1 is 3. So we have the fraction 3/2. All right, so 1 plus 1/2 is 1 and 1/2. And then, of course, we can convert this mixed number fraction to this improper fraction 3/2. Okay, so now we're down to this. Okay, so now we have 2 times 3/2. So let's go ahead and tighten this problem up a little bit. So what is the last thing to do here? Well, the last thing to do is multiplication, right? So when you see a number outside of parentheses, this means multiplication. And how do we multiply fractions? Easy. All we have to do is multiply the respective numerators and denominators. So 2 times 3 is 6, and then 1 times 2 is 2. So our answer here is 6 divided by 2, which of course is 3. So C is the right answer. Okay, now if you knew what you were doing and got this right, I definitely have to give you a nice little happy face and an A+. That is fantastic. Now, don't feel bad if you got this wrong, because a lot of people, believe me, mess up PEMDAS. I've been teaching math for decades, and even people that are taking advanced math can lose sight of PEMDAS. So if you really want to master basic mathematics, you got to understand PEMDAS. Now, if you are kind of thinking about math and saying, well, you know what, it's been many years, I forgot all this stuff, and that's perfectly understandable if you haven't done math for a long time. But if you want to brush up on your basic math skills, let me offer a few recommendations. One, I have a couple of courses that are fantastic for those of you that want to kind of brush up on your math skills. So the first is my Math Foundations course. That is a quick kind of little mini math boot camp on basic mathematics, fractions, decimals, order of operations, percent, etc. Now, my second course that I want to recommend is my Math Skills Rebuilder course. So if you want to rebuild your basic math skills, algebra, geometry, all that stuff that you learned in high school, well, then you want to check out my Math Skills Rebuilder course. You can find links to both of those courses in the description of this video. All right, so with all that being said, I definitely wish you all the best in your math adventures. Thank you for your time and have a great day.